The next area we're going to talk about are the things that you can have that can get you in trouble, even though you can otherwise have a firearm. I'm going to use the phrase prohibited person. I assume those of you that are listening to this, probably most of you are not prohibited persons. People that either Maine or federal law, which is a little more lax actually, prevents from owning a firearm at all. The basic things that you'll have trouble possessing, not just owning, but possessing, are fully automatic weapons, things that will fire more than one projectile with a single pull of the trigger that aren't shotguns. Short-barreled rifles, things like little short-barreled AK-47s, broom-handled Mausers, pistols that you can put a stock on. There are some ways that you can pay transfer taxes and go to ATF and jump through a few hoops to be able to own one of those. But don't think that you can duct tape a shoulder stock onto your revolver and be fine playing wide earth. No, you can't. Silencers. We can now use them for hunting, but you can't just grab one and put it on. Same kind of deal. It has to be, you have to pay a transfer tax to ATF, go through a little background check, and you have to do that with each silencer. Ballistic knives. I don't think anybody that I know owns one, but there's knives that actually shoot stuff. They're a problem. Armor-piercing ammunition. If it can be shot out of a handgun and it goes through soft body armor, there's a good chance that's considered illegal armor-piercing ammunition. And the only people that can possess it in Maine are law enforcement officers in the line of duty. If you're a cop off-duty hunting during your 3-week vacation because you've got a lot of seniority, don't think you can be carrying armor-piercing ammunition with you. Probably your fellow cops aren't going to write you for it, but they could. That's all the stuff that's typically encountered. Destructive devices, things that blow up. That doesn't include cannons, black powder cannons that shoot stuff, although there may be some fire marshal regulations that apply to those. But if something like a bomb blows up, or if it uses smokeless powder and a cartridge firearm with a barrel diameter of greater than 50 caliber, that's not a shotgun, is probably a destructive device. That's why, although they're fun, you don't see people toting around grenade launchers because they're called destructive devices. And not only is the launcher a destructive device, if what it shoots blows up at the end, that's a separate destructive device. People think that it's fun to make handgun bullets that explode at the end. Don't do it. You're making destructive devices. And you may do some time. So that's a good survey of the kinds of things that you should watch out having. No carry zones. That is a phrase that we use a lot to describe places where the possession of firearms that's generally available is more restricted than it otherwise would be. Here's a rough list of them off the top of my head that you'll typically encounter. First, federal premises, like the post office, indoors in the post office. There's some exceptions that might apply to you if you're an FFL dealer or you're mailing a gun to yourself. I still don't want to push it. If you want to pay me $10,000 to find out that you're right, great. Otherwise, have the postman pick up the package that you are mailing the gun to your other home in Arizona. There are circumstances under which you can mail firearms, but there are very few where you can take them into federal premises. There's another exception, by the way, for federal courts. If a gun of yours is being used in evidence, you call ahead, they come out and get it, they tag it, bag it, do all kinds of things to it, and make it safe, and then they'll use it in the courtroom and give it back to you outside. State courts, same thing. No guns in state courts. They're generally considered prison contraband in jails, secure areas of air terminals. They need to be checked baggage on Amtrak. There is some regulation at the Augusta airport, but it's questionable whether that's authorized by statute. The capital area in Augusta, There is a regulation, again, it's never been found to be valid or not, but the Department of Public Safety says that in the 16 square miles of its capital area, only on-duty law enforcement can have firearms. And that includes not just the Capitol building, but there's DHHS buildings, there's DMV buildings, there's the Small Animal Administration, there's everything scattered all over Augusta, both sides of the river, and they don't even have a map that's up to date. I know because I've asked for one. I've asked for it a couple times. They've said we're working on it. They say that every year. Basically, you're entering one of the circles of hell if you're going anywhere near Augusta. It's best to keep any firearms in your car, make sure they're not parked in a government parking lot, and walk to wherever you're going. If it's State House, Cross Office Building, Archives Building, DHHS, courts, Public Safety Building, all of those things around Augusta. It doesn't, by the way, apply to the other more remote state areas. Bars, places licensed for on-premises consumption of alcohol. You can't drink in a supermarket, and you can carry there. But bars can be posted no guns. If they're posted no guns in a manner likely to come to your attention, don't take a gun in there. That's a bad thing. It's a crime all by itself. Likewise, even in an unposted bar, if you possess a firearm and you have excessive blood alcohol, same standard as with cars, 0.08 or above, you're guilty. Bottom line is, however, you should never drink while carrying a firearm. Either gun or alcohol, not both. Same is true with prescription drugs. And if you want to know why, familiarize yourself with the story of Eric Scott, who was on a pile of painkillers and ended up getting shot by the Las Vegas police because he didn't know where he was because he was too gorked out. No painkillers, no alcohol while you're carrying, even though it's legal. Other kinds of places, parks. If you don't have a permit to carry a firearm, you can't carry in a park from any park in Maine from May to September. You can't carry in Acadia, you can't carry on the Appalachian Trail. Some parks from September to May have actually allow hunting in specific parks. That won't be every state park. The federal parks generally allow people to have a permitted pistol. And that's true not only of Acadia, but the parks in most states. They changed that a few years ago after the Heller decision. Other places that you can't carry, well, people may tell you that you can be excluded from any business, and you can be excluded, that's true, but it's not a separate crime. Generally, if somebody tells you to leave for a reason, you have to leave because they're the owner. Hotels and campgrounds can refuse you service because you have firearms with you. There's no requirement that you tell them, but if they figure it out or see firearms, they can kick you out. Interstate, I'm going to talk now a little bit about who can have firearms, who they can be given to, and taking them between states. If you have a Maine concealed handgun permit, there's one area I left out, schools. In Maine, you cannot possess a firearm on school property unless it is part of a recognized, by that I mean the superintendent's signature on letterhead, school activity. I've actually done this with a fellow that I teach these courses with, but even then we can't have ammunition in the firearms. The only place you can have loaded guns at a school, if it's a public school or a approved private school, is on a shooting range. That's the only place you can have it. It's a little murkier for institutions of higher education. They can make their own rules. It doesn't say they can make their own crimes, but they can sure kick you off campus if they have a policy and you have a firearm. And if you're a student, they can say no guns in the dorms. And it's small comfort to know that maybe you'll beat the criminal charge if you forfeited a year's tuition. Congratulations, you've just been effectively fined $10,000. So, those are the classic no carry zones. Oh, one more that's worthy of mention. It isn't exactly a no carry zone. It's the safe schools area. The feds have what they call the Safe Schools Act of 1996 that purported to throw a 1,000-foot perimeter around all school property. So you see where the school property ends, and 1,000 feet beyond that is where this magic zone ends. Now, it doesn't include private property, and there's a bunch of exceptions, the most important of which is it doesn't apply to a firearm carried by a person with a state permit for that firearm issued in the same state. That means if I go to Missouri, if I'm going to carry through one of those fancy Missouri school zones, reciprocity ain't enough. I'm going to need to get my own Missouri permit. Otherwise, to go through one of those zones, it has to be either in a walking gun rack unloaded or carried according to the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986 out of the passenger compartment, unloaded, in a locked case with any ammunition in a separate locked case. So now you know how to get through the magic 1,000-foot zones. And you can't really see them. About the only way you can figure it out is with Google Earth. So, next area. Transfer of firearms to various people. The people that you have to worry about are prohibited persons, minors, aliens, which actually falls under prohibited persons, and another subset of prohibited persons, people who have a condition of bail or probation. Maybe they haven't been convicted yet, but they have an order or something pending trial that says they can't have dangerous weapons or firearms. They don't always say dangerous weapons. It may just be firearms. They can still have a bow. But if you're going to transfer a firearm to anybody, you ought to make sure they aren't a prohibited person or a minor that falls under the wrong kind of category. There are three categories of transfers of stuff to minors that you need to worry about. The first is endangering the welfare of a child statute. And it talks about air rifles, ammunition for firearms, smokeless powder, and black powder. It also talks about tobacco and alcohol too, but that's not what this course is about. If you're a parent, foster parent, or guardian, or somebody approved by a parent, foster parent, or guardian, you can provide somebody under 16 ammunition, smokeless powder, and so forth for use in a supervised manner. But note it includes air rifles. That means if I'm going to have somebody come over to shoot the BB gun with my son, I'm going to make sure that I get that parent's permission in writing. That's why email is great. Even just a BB gun or a paintball gun. You may not think of that, but it could bite you. The second one is unlawful transfer of a firearm other than a handgun to a minor. The age there is again 16. You can transfer a firearm to somebody who's a 16-year-old and they're treated like an adult. Somebody under 16, there's a very similar limitation. They can be approved by a parent, foster parent, or guardian. For example, if you're taking your nephew out hunting, you'd want the approval for the firearm and the approval for the ammunition. And then that's okay. But age 16, if they're under age 16, you can't be providing them in any sense a firearm unless you comply with the statute. Finally, handguns. There's a double whammy here. Our statute mirrors the federal Juvenile Delinquent Protection Act passed by the Clinton administration. I'm sure their intent was wonderful, but I'm not sure that it really gets at juvenile delinquents. It's intended to keep handguns out of the hands of minors under a variety of circumstances. There are a host of exceptions there too. If you're in the military, on active duty, yeah, you can have a firearm. If you are if it's either in your house and you've got guests over that are kids, and this one's amazing, and it's actually happened a couple of times in the US, or if your kid's over at somebody else's house and Al-Qaeda starts to break in, you can hand out firearms to the kids to help repel borders. You really can. It's there in both the state and the federal law. There are provisions for target shooting, for transportation to and from target shooting. But again, if it's, and the age limit there is 18 to simply provide them with a firearm, 21 to sell them a firearm if you're a dealer. So anybody under age 18, handgun, look at the law. Who is a prohibited person? There's a lot of categories about it, including a couple that are controversial now. Most controversial of all is the federal category of user of or addicted to marijuana or other illegal substances. If you've ever purchased a firearm, you fill out a form at the beginning, if you've purchased one from a dealer, and it asks you a number of questions. And most of them, if you answer yes to it, you won't be walking out with a firearm. You won't be in violation of federal law. You won't have lied. The dealer will look at it and say, you're a person under indictment or a fugitive from justice. I guess I won't be selling you a firearm today. In 1998, they added non-resident aliens. So if you've ever got to get hold of a Form 4473, and that will tell you, the classic is felons, people who've received dishonorable discharges from the military, somebody who has been adjudicated insane or a mental defective. And that doesn't mean, by the way, that you've simply seen a psychiatrist. Somebody who's the marijuana or other illegal substances, ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the federal bureau that regulates the stuff from Washington, says, we don't care about medical marijuana. That's between you and God and Barack Obama and Paul LePage. That means that you won't get in trouble for smoking the marijuana. But if you're a marijuana smoker and you've got guns, we've got a problem with you. And they still have that position. I've heard people try to tell me it's otherwise. Nope, it's right there, and it's still there in the Gun Control Act of 1968. If you're somebody with a pain problem or some other kind of problem, you think you'd like to shoot, somebody offers you marijuana, you got a choice, marijuana or shooting. I think the choice is obvious. In terms of the difference between Maine and federal law doesn't prohibit you from using or possessing black powder firearms. Neither Maine or federal law prevents you from owning or possessing bows and arrows, swords, things like that. The feds only regulate firearms, cartridge firearms, nothing black powder. Maine does go to black powder. And because of that, if you want to go black powder hunting, there's a way, if you're a felon, you can actually get a permit from the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife to go and hunt with a black powder rifle or pistol. I haven't seen anybody try to get a concealed handgun permit yet. Actually, I did see one, and it failed. By the way, if you're convicted of something that makes you a prohibited person, the Maine Supreme Court has said it's completely discretionary about whether to give you a permit to carry a black powder firearm or not. How about going from one state to another? I've mentioned the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986. There's a lot of different places that you can find it. There are a lot of websites like packing.org, or you can go right to 18 U.S. Code, Section 922 and 921. That will give you all the details. Basically, and by the way, this applies to fully automatic weapons and destructive devices and things like this as well. If I can legally own a firearm in Maine or any other state, and I want to go to some other state where I can legally possess it, I can go through all the intervening states and the District of Columbia, so long as I comply with this law. And I can go through those federal school zones. Again, the law is that it has to be, if there's something other than the passenger compartment of a vehicle, it has to be in that other compartment. If there's a trunk, that's where it's got to be. It's got to be in a separate locked case. And any ammunition has to be in another separate locked case. The act itself doesn't say that you can bring it into the room with you at night, or that you can use it for any other purpose while you're on the road. If you've got a very kindly state, maybe you can. Maybe their justification provisions would permit it. But you'll need to know the law of that state before you'll know whether you can get away with it or not. So far I've covered, and I think it's pretty much complete, how you can use a firearm, both to legally threaten somebody and to legally shoot somebody. How to legally shoot dangerous dogs. How to legally shoot animals that are causing damage to your crops and to your domestic animals. The kinds of firearms that can get you in trouble. The places that are particularly problematic for carrying firearms either with or without a permit. By the way, you can now see there's a lot of advantages to getting a permit. And finally, the kinds of people that can't have firearms, or that the use of them is very restricted, and that you shouldn't provide them to. Sale is another thing. Don't be in the business of selling firearms without getting a federal firearms license from Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And don't ever sell a firearm to somebody from another state. It's against the law. Private sale of firearms, no, you aren't required in Maine now to do a background check. But how do you know that gun isn't stolen? And how does he know he's not selling to a prohibited person? Well, you can go to a dealer and you can pay them to do the transfer, and they'll charge you like $20. And it's money well spent, because it basically means that the liability is off everybody connected with that deal, pretty much. The second thing you can do is both of you can get your driver's license numbers together, and they have to be Maine driver's license numbers because you can't sell to somebody from another state. Call up the local police department and say, me, John Chapman, Maine driver's license number 1589059, and Todd Tallhurst, Maine driver's license number, and give that one, are about to do a transaction. It involves a firearm. You don't need to tell them what it is, but it's a good thing to tell them the serial number, because they track stolen firearms by serial number in the state of Maine. Now, it could be that the seller came into it, maybe the uncle stole it, gave it to dad, dad died, he's got it, he had no idea it was stolen. If you're going through this exercise, there's a good chance that the cops are going to say, in fact, there's a probability they're going to say, wait, you called us. You didn't know it was stolen, but you're going to have to give it back to the guy. Okay. That's a lot better than finding it out a long time down the road. And in addition, you probably won't be sued once you make the second call, which I'm going to tell you about, for negligent transfer of a dangerous weapon to somebody who's a prohibited person or something. You call them up, you say, we're going to do this transfer tomorrow, unless you can tell us a reason why we shouldn't, other than you don't like guns. We'll call you back tomorrow, and they'll probably say something like, we don't have to do that. Yeah, we know, goodbye. Click. Call them back the next day. Unless they can give you a specific reason, like the gun is stolen, or John Chapman has been convicted of the crime of marrying a horse in another jurisdiction, it's a felony there, then you'll complete the transfer, make a written bill of sale that both of you have, so there's a paper trail in case it turns up someplace unpleasant, and shake hands and go about your business. Now you can see somewhat about why selling firearms is something to be approached cautiously. That's about all I have time for tonight. It's just the high points. I go into it in a lot more detail in the courses that I teach. I've taught you what the law is. I haven't taught you much about how to apply it on the ground and how to apply it while people are shooting at you and while you're trying to figure out what to do next. And that's the stuff that will save your life. But right now, you've got a good idea of what the law is and where to find it. Thank you. I'm John Chapman.